Damon rubbed his tired eyes as he walked through the empty corridors of the military station. 20 years of fighting wars across the galaxy had left him exhausted, and all he wanted was to go home to his small farm on Earth. But Admiral Thompson had one last job for him. The old woman's office smelled like coffee and old leather. She looked up from her desk with those sharp eyes that had seen too many battles. "Sit down, Damon. We need to talk." He dropped into the chair and waited. After 2 decades of taking orders, he knew when something big was coming. The Admiral slid a thick folder across her desk. The cover was marked with red letters that made his stomach drop. "Top secret, species termination." "This is your final mission," she said quietly. "After this, you can retire with full honors and go back to that farm you keep talking about." Damon opened the folder and felt his breath catch. The photos inside showed a massive creature with scales like black metal and eyes that seemed to burn even in the grainy images. A dragon. He thought they were all dead. "His name is Korath," Admiral Thompson continued. "He's the last of his kind, hiding on a dead planet called Pyria. Our intelligence teams believe he's building weapons that could wipe out entire solar systems." Damon studied the pictures of the fortress carved into a mountain. It looked ancient and powerful, like something from the old stories his grandmother used to tell. "Why me? You could send a whole strike team." "Because dragons are smart, Damon. They can sense large groups coming from light years away. But one man, moving quiet and careful, might actually make it inside." She leaned back in her chair. "Besides, you've never failed a mission." That was true, though it had cost him plenty. Friends, relationships, pieces of his soul he'd never get back. He looked at the specialized weapons laid out on the table next to the folder. Plasma rifles designed to punch through dragon scales. Ammunition that could tear through their legendary armor. "The Galactic Council is nervous," Thompson added. "Dragons ruled half the galaxy once. If this one decides to start rebuilding their empire, we might not be able to stop him." Damon remembered the old war stories. Dragons that could breathe fire hot enough to melt starship hulls. Creatures so tough that entire fleets had been lost trying to bring down just one. Humanity had only survived because a plague had wiped out most of the dragon population before they could finish their conquest. "When do I leave?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Tonight. There's an asteroid storm hitting Pyria's system in 6 hours. Perfect cover for your approach." Thompson's voice softened just a little. "Come back alive, soldier. You've earned your retirement." As Damon gathered his gear, he couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something about this mission felt different from all the others. Maybe it was because he was so close to being done with the military life. Maybe it was the thought of facing a creature from humanity's darkest legends. The stealth ship was small and cramped, designed to slip past sensors undetected. As they jumped to hyperspace, Damon cleaned his weapons one more time and reviewed the mission files. The intelligence reports painted Korath as a monster waiting to unleash destruction on the galaxy. A creature driven by hatred and revenge, plotting humanity's downfall from his lonely fortress. But as Damon stared out at the stars rushing past, he wondered about something the reports didn't mention. If dragons were so smart, so advanced, why was this one all alone? Why hadn't he attacked already if revenge was really his goal? The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "Approaching Pyria system. Asteroid storm looks perfect for cover. You ready back there?" Damon strapped on his gear and checked his weapons one final time. "Ready as I'll ever be." As the ship shuddered through the asteroid field toward the dead planet below, Damon tried to push away his doubts. He had orders. The galaxy was counting on him to eliminate a threat that could destroy everything humanity had built. But deep in his gut, something told him this mission wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. And for the first time in his military career, Damon wasn't sure if following orders was the right thing to do. The fortress grew larger in the view screen as they descended through Pyria's thin atmosphere, and Damon prepared himself to face the last dragon in the galaxy. The drop pod hit the rocky surface with a bone-jarring thud that made Damon's teeth rattle. He waited in the darkness for 30 seconds, listening for any sounds that might mean he'd been detected. Nothing but wind whistling through the dead planet's atmosphere. He cracked open the pod's hatch and stepped onto Pyria's surface. The ground was covered in black volcanic glass that crunched under his boots. Above him, the fortress rose like a mountain carved by giants, its towers disappearing into the gray clouds. It looked even more massive in person than it had in the photographs. Damon activated his scanner and started moving toward the outer walls. His training kicked in automatically: stay low, watch for movement, check every shadow. But as he got closer to the fortress, something felt wrong. Where were the guards? The automated defenses? Even basic security sensors? The main gate stood wide open. That stopped him cold. No military commander in their right mind would leave their fortress undefended, especially not a creature as supposedly dangerous as Korath. Damon approached the entrance carefully, weapon raised, expecting a trap at any moment. The hallway beyond the gate was enormous, built for creatures much larger than humans. Ancient torches lined the walls, but most had burned out long ago. The few that still flickered cast dancing shadows that made Damon's skin crawl. His footsteps echoed in the silence, no matter how quietly he tried to move. The walls were covered in carvings that took his breath away. Dragons soaring through star-filled skies. Massive cities floating among the clouds. Families of dragons gathered around what looked like council chambers. These weren't the savage monsters from the history books. These carvings showed a sophisticated civilization. Damon paused at one carving that made him uncomfortable. It showed dragons and other alien species working together, building something that looked like a medical facility. That didn't match the stories he'd been told about dragons being conquerors who enslaved other races. His scanner beeped softly, picking up a strong energy signature deeper in the fortress. Damon followed the signal through corridors that seemed to go on forever. Dust covered everything, and spider webs hung in the corners like ancient curtains. This place felt abandoned, like no one had walked these halls for years. But the energy readings were getting stronger. He climbed a massive spiral staircase that could have fit a tank on each step. The walls here showed more carvings, but these were different. Dragons lying still, their eyes closed. Others gathered around them, their postures suggesting grief. It looked like funeral scenes? The scanner led him to a pair of doors that must have been 50 feet tall. They were already cracked open, blue light spilling through the gap. Damon pressed himself against the wall and listened. No sounds of movement, but there was something else. A low, rhythmic sound that seemed almost like breathing. Something big was breathing on the other side of those doors. Damon checked his weapon one more time and slipped through the gap. The chamber beyond was incredible. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, and the walls were covered in screens showing star maps, medical diagrams, and what looked like complex genetic sequences. But none of that mattered, because in the center of the room was the dragon. Korath was even larger than Damon had imagined. His scales were deep black with veins of silver running through them like lightning. His massive wings were folded against his sides, and his long neck curved down toward the floor where dozens of holographic images flickered in the air. But the dragon wasn't preparing weapons or planning attacks. He was crying. Tears the size of dinner plates rolled down Korath's snout as he stared at the holograms. Damon moved closer and saw what the dragon was looking at. The images showed other dragons, thousands of them. Young ones playing together. Elderly dragons that looked wise and peaceful. Entire communities gathered for what looked like celebrations. And every single dragon in the holograms had the same thing in common. They all looked sick. Their scales were dull, their eyes were clouded, and many were lying motionless on the ground. Korath let out a sound that was part roar and part sob. It was the loneliest sound Damon had ever heard. This wasn't a monster planning revenge. This was a creature mourning his entire species. Damon's weapon suddenly felt very heavy in his hands. Everything he'd been told about this mission was starting to feel like a lie. He stood there in the shadows, watching the last dragon in the galaxy cry over images of his dead people, and wondered what the hell he was really supposed to be doing here. Damon stood frozen in the shadows, his finger hovering over the trigger as he watched the massive dragon weep. Every instinct told him to stay hidden, to wait for the right moment to strike. But something about the scene in front of him made his chest feel tight. "I can smell you, human," Korath said suddenly, his voice echoing through the chamber like distant thunder. But there was no anger in it, just exhaustion. "You might as well come out. I'm too tired to play games." Damon's heart hammered against his ribs. 20 years of combat experience told him to shoot first and ask questions later. But instead, he found himself stepping into the light, weapon still raised but his hands shaking slightly. The dragon turned his massive head, and Damon got his first good look at Korath's eyes. They weren't the burning pits of hatred he'd expected. They were ancient and sad, filled with a pain so deep it made Damon's own war memories feel small. "Damon Rivers," the dragon said, and Damon nearly dropped his weapon in shock. "Yes, I know who you are. The human who never misses. The soldier who always completes his missions." Korath's mouth curved into what might have been a bitter smile. "They sent their best to kill me. How do you know my name?" Damon managed to ask, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "Dragons have long memories," Korath replied. "We kept records of everything, including the humans who fought us. Your reputation precedes you. The dragon's gaze shifted to the weapon in Damon's hands. Are you going to use that, or are you curious about why I'm not trying to kill you? Damon kept the gun trained on the dragon but didn't fire. My orders are to eliminate you before you can attack human colonies. Korath let out a sound that might have been laughter if it wasn't so sad. Attack? Child, look around you. Does this look like a war room to you? For the first time, Damon really looked at the equipment surrounding them. Medical scanners lined the walls. Genetic sequencing machines hummed quietly in the corners. Computer screens showed complex molecular diagrams that looked nothing like weapon schematics. This wasn't a fortress preparing for war. It was a laboratory. I don't understand, Damon said, though his weapon dipped slightly. Of course you don't. They didn't tell you the truth. Korath gestured with one massive claw toward the holographic images still floating in the air. Tell me, Damon Rivers, what do you know about how my people died? Damon recited what every human child learned in school. A plague wiped out most of the dragon population during the expansion wars. It weakened your forces enough for humanity to push back and win. A plague, Korath repeated slowly. Yes, that's accurate. But do you know where that plague came from? Something cold settled in Damon's stomach. It was just a disease. These things happen in space. No, Korath said, his voice growing harder. It wasn't just a disease. It was a pathogen that humans carried in their blood. Harmless to your species, but deadly to mine. When your people began expanding across the galaxy, they spread it to every world they touched. The weapon in Damon's hands suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. That's impossible. We would have known. Would you? Korath asked. Your people were too young, too eager to explore. You didn't even realize you were carriers. The first dragon colonies that made contact with human traders started getting sick within weeks. We didn't understand what was happening at first. The dragon turned back to the holograms, his voice becoming quieter. By the time we figured out the connection, it was too late. The plague had spread to dozens of worlds. Millions of my people were dying. But the history books say dragons were trying to conquer human space, Damon protested, though his conviction was wavering. We were trying to quarantine the infected areas, Korath explained. We attacked human settlements not to conquer them, but to stop the spread of the disease. We were fighting for our very survival. Damon stared at the holographic images with new eyes. The sick dragons he'd seen weren't victims of war. They were victims of an accidental genocide that humanity had never even realized they'd committed. The Galactic Council knows this, he said, and it wasn't a question. Of course they do. But it's easier to paint us as monsters than to admit that humanity's expansion accidentally wiped out an entire species. Korath's eyes met Damon's again. Tell me, soldier, what's easier to live with? Being heroes who defeated evil dragons, or being the cause of the greatest extinction event in galactic history? Damon lowered his weapon completely, his mind reeling. Everything he thought he knew about the Dragon Wars was a lie. And now he was standing face to face with the last survivor of a species humanity had accidentally destroyed. Damon's legs gave out, and he found himself sitting hard on the cold stone floor. His weapon clattered beside him, forgotten. The weight of what Korath had told him pressed down on his chest like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. Billions, he whispered, staring at the holographic images floating around them. You're saying we killed billions of your people by accident? Not you personally, Korath said, lowering his massive head until he was closer to Damon's level. Your species was young, exploring the galaxy for the first time. You couldn't have known what you carried in your blood. Damon ran his hands through his hair, trying to process everything. But the people who sent me here, they know the truth. They've always known. The dragon's voice was gentle now, almost paternal. But admitting the truth would mean accepting responsibility for the greatest tragedy in galactic history. It's easier to let everyone believe dragons were the villains. A bitter laugh escaped Damon's throat. And here I am, sent to kill the last witness to what really happened. Not the last witness, Korath corrected. The records exist. The evidence is scattered across a dozen archive worlds. But I'm the last one who was actually there. The last one who remembers what my people were really like. Damon looked up at the dragon's ancient eyes and saw something he recognized. The same haunted look he'd seen in his own mirror for years. You're carrying survivor's guilt. For 300 years, Korath confirmed. I was off-world when the plague reached my home colony. A research mission to study distant stars. When I returned, everyone was dead. My mate, my younglings, my entire extended family. All gone. The pain in the dragon's voice hit Damon like a punch to the gut. He thought about his own losses, the friends he'd watched die in pointless battles across the galaxy. But losing everyone? An entire species? He couldn't even imagine that level of grief. I lost my whole squad once, Damon said quietly. 15 good people. Command sent us into what they knew was a trap, and I was the only one who made it out. He picked up a piece of broken stone and turned it over in his hands. I've been carrying that weight for 12 years. Some nights I can't sleep, wondering why I survived when they didn't. Survivor's guilt is a burden that never truly leaves, Korath said with understanding. Every day I wake hoping to hear another dragon's call across the stars, knowing I never will. Every breakthrough in my research feels hollow because there's no one left to share it with. Research? Damon asked, gesturing at the equipment around them. I've spent the last century trying to find a cure, hoping against hope that somewhere in the galaxy, another dragon might have survived. Korath's claws clicked against the stone as he moved. I've analyzed the plague from every angle, studied its effects on dragon genetics, even experimented with ways to reverse the cellular damage it caused. And? Nothing. The pathogen was too thorough, too perfectly designed to target dragon biology. It killed us completely, down to the cellular level. The dragon's voice cracked slightly. I am truly the last. Damon stood up slowly, his mind racing. The intelligence report said you were building weapons of mass destruction. Those fools wouldn't know a medical scanner from a plasma cannon, Korath said with the first hint of anger he'd shown. Everything here is designed to preserve life, not destroy it. I've been trying to save what little remains of dragon knowledge before I die. Why? Damon asked. If everyone's gone, why keep trying? Because someone should remember us as we really were, Korath replied. Not as the monsters in your history books, but as a people who loved learning, who built beautiful cities, who raised families and dreamed of exploring the stars. He gestured to the carvings on the walls. We weren't perfect, but we weren't evil either. We were just people in our own way. Damon walked over to one of the wall carvings, running his fingers over the intricate details. It showed dragon younglings learning to fly, guided by patient adults. The scene was so full of love and care that it made his chest ache. You know what the worst part is? Damon said without turning around. Tell me. If I go back and report that you're dead, the lie continues forever. But if I tell the truth about what I found here, they'll just send someone else to finish the job. Damon's shoulders sagged. Either way, you die alone, and the real story dies with you. Perhaps, Korath said thoughtfully. Or perhaps there's a third option we haven't considered yet. Damon turned away from the wall carving to face Korath, something shifting in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was seeing clearly. What kind of third option? The ancient dragon's eyes gleamed with an intelligence that had survived centuries of loneliness. What if the last dragon didn't die in silence? What if his story reached every corner of the galaxy? They'd never let that happen, Damon said, shaking his head. The moment I step foot back on Earth with your story, they'll lock me up and classify everything. Then they'll send a strike team to finish what I couldn't. Who said anything about going back to Earth? Korath asked, and there was something almost like hope in his voice. Tell me, Damon Rivers, do you know how to operate a galactic communication array? Damon felt his pulse quicken. You mean broadcast directly to the networks? That's treason. I'd be breaking about 50 different laws. Laws written by the same people who sent you here to murder the last witness to their greatest mistake, Korath pointed out. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking unjust laws. The dragon moved to one of the massive computer terminals, his claws dancing across controls designed for his species. Screens lit up around the chamber, showing communication networks that span the entire galaxy. News feeds, government channels, educational broadcasts, everything humanity and its allies used to share information. I've been monitoring galactic communications for decades, Korath explained. Partly to keep track of human expansion, but mostly just to feel less alone. I know exactly how to reach every major population center simultaneously. Damon stared at the screens, his heart hammering. If we do this, there's no going back. They'll hunt us both to the ends of the galaxy. Perhaps. But the truth would be out there. Every human child would learn what really happened during the expansion wars. Every alien species would understand that the dragons weren't monsters, just people trying to save themselves from an accidental plague. And you? Damon asked. What happens to you when this is over? Korath was quiet for a long moment. I've been alone for 300 years, Damon. I've spent every day of that time preserving dragon knowledge and hoping someone would eventually want to hear our real story. If I die knowing the truth finally came out, that would be enough. Damon walked over to his discarded weapon and picked it up, turning it over in his hands. 20 years of following orders. 20 years of trusting that his commanders knew what was right. But looking at this ancient, grieving creature who'd spent centuries trying to preserve the memory of his people, Damon realized his orders had never felt more wrong. How long would we have before they tracked us down? He asked. Long enough, Korath replied. My fortress has shields that could hold off a fleet for weeks. And once the broadcast goes out, every news organization in the galaxy will want to verify the story. It'll be too big to cover up. Damon made his choice. He threw the weapon aside and walked to the communication array. Show me what to do. For the next 6 hours, they worked together preparing the broadcast. Korath had centuries of preserved dragon history, not just the plague years, but millennia of culture, art, and scientific advancement. Video records of dragon families, their architecture, their philosophy. Evidence that they'd been poets and philosophers, not just warriors. People need to see who we really were, Korath explained as he compiled the files. Not the propaganda versions, but the real us. Parents teaching their children. Scientists making discoveries. Artists creating beauty that could take your breath away. When they were ready, Damon's hands shook as he initiated the transmission. Across the galaxy, every major communication network would receive the same package, the true history of the dragon-human wars, told by the last dragon and a human soldier who chose truth over orders. The response was immediate and explosive. Within hours, news feeds were running the story on every inhabited world. Government officials scrambled to deny the claims, but Korath's evidence was too thorough, too detailed to dismiss. 6 months later, Damon sat in a prison cell on Earth, waiting for his court-martial. But the broadcasts had sparked something that couldn't be stopped. Protests filled the streets of major cities. Historians demanded access to classified archives. The truth was spreading faster than any government could contain it. Admiral Thompson visited him once, her face tired and angry. You've destroyed everything we built, soldier. The stability, the unity. People don't trust their leaders anymore. Maybe they shouldn't have, Damon replied quietly. Maybe it's time humans learn to live with the truth about what we've done. Years passed. Damon served his sentence and was released to a galaxy that had fundamentally changed. Dragon studies became a required course in schools. Memorial gardens were built on the worlds where dragons had died. And on Pyria, Korath's fortress became a museum, visited by millions who wanted to learn about the people humanity had accidentally destroyed. Damon returned there on the anniversary of their broadcast, finding the old dragon weaker but peaceful. Any regrets? Korath asked. None, Damon said, looking out at the ships bringing visitors to learn dragon history. Sometimes being human means admitting when we're wrong. Even when it's hard. Korath smiled, the first truly happy expression Damon had ever seen on the ancient face. Perhaps that's why your species survived when so many others didn't. You're capable of growth. The truth had set them both free.